A recording of this conversation will be on ckgconversations.com as well within a day or two. We are joined this evening by licensed marriage and family therapist Ashley Morgan Sukup with Summit Emotional Health. Ashley works with children, adolescents, and adults specializing in PTSD and trauma, marital concerns, anxiety, depression, ADHD, substance abuse, and behavioral concerns. So specifically, Ashley assists individuals and families in exploring new patterns of communication to promote long-lasting change within the family. So welcome, Ashley, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much. I just had to look and make sure I wasn't on mute.
So let's start this evening by addressing the term addiction. So in relation to excessive video game and screen use. So we certainly don't want to minimize the very real and very serious struggle of those battling substance addictions. And I know that term can kind of be bandied about. So Ashley, what is the definition of addiction, and are video games and screens addictive? And now you are on mute now.
I'm on mute. Okay, cool. So a lot of times when I have parents come into the office, they will say, my child's addicted to video games. They're addicted through the screens. I don't know what to do. So I'm glad we're starting here with what the definition of addiction actually is. So to put it simply, it is a habitual or chronic use of a substance or a behavior. And I want to clarify too, there's actually only one diagnosable behavioral disorder in our manual, which is the DSM-5, and that's basically our Bible for how we diagnose individuals, whether it's anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and then addictions. And gambling disorder is actually the only one that is currently in the DSM. But these are substance use or behaviors, and this is what we'll splice out a little bit, that impede somebody's functioning physically, psychologically, and socially. And when we're really looking at it, something we would say, does it impede your activities of daily living? Are you able to still get up and go to school, be able to function at work, have healthy relationships? And sometimes when you're working with people who are struggling with addiction, they'll say, well, of course I can. I still go to work and like hold down my job. Yes, but are you forgetting to go, are you able to do it to the best of your ability? Are you forgetting meetings, or not as organized, or when you're having engagement conversations with your people that you're in relationships with your partner or your children, are you able to do that in a healthy way? So sometimes people who struggle with addiction, they might say, no, it's not impeding my activities of daily living or my social relationships, where it could be. And another big component to an addiction is it really impacts the circuitry and the brain circuitry, the circuits in your brain. And one of the things we look at is, are you developing like a withdrawal or a tolerance? So tolerance is, I need more and more and more of the substance or the behavior to kind of fill that similar or same positive experiences that I've had previously. Like if I have, and I use drinking as an example, I would be able to feel tipsy or get drunk off of one drink, and then when I need 2, 3, 4, and certain drugs or in behaviors such as gambling, they have longer trajectories than others. Like I might have an opportunity with drinking. It might take a longer trajectory to addiction and develop that tolerance, where if somebody uses heroin, for example, that would be a shorter trajectory. And that's really what we're looking at. And part of the reason why, video games and screen addiction isn't in the DSM is really they started coming about, this big push with screens started in 2008. Well, the DSM was developed in 2013. So there's not a lot of research to even look at that trajectory yet to be able to discern, is it actually an addiction? But we do know, and we'll speak to this in a second, that there is, withdrawal impacts and implications when you take a video game or screen time from individuals or kids, as well as they do develop a tolerance when they experience these certain behaviors or the stimuli that comes with a video game and a screen. So do you want to pause for a second? Does anybody have questions about that? Sorry, Susan.
Ashley, I do want to ask, what chemically is happening in the brain to foster addiction? So you spoke a little bit about like the tolerance, and specifically with screens, like we know there's a dopamine hit in the brain with addiction, but can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's several things that can happen, and we'll see them when you're using or utilizing specific types of programming within video games and screens. So some individuals, they've seen the circuitry be rewired, and you have more of a hyper arousal state. And that'll be seen when you are playing video games that are violent or, first person shooter games. They're like hitting on a fear response. Your fight or flight response is happening in your brain, and it's touching on that, and you're hyper aroused. So I'm more hyper vigilant when I'm engaging in interactions. If I'm playing a first person shooter game or a violent, experiencing violent stimuli over and over, and then somebody walks up behind me and they say, hey, right, they're saying hi, and you're going, what? And then you might be more quick to snap or have an impulsive reaction and struggle with impulse control. So there's that piece. The other, speaking with the dopamine receptors, you'll see this a lot. I know Candy Crush was very popular, and that was actually one that was popular among adult clients. They would come in, they play their Candy Crush, or you even see it when they have one of the ones my little guy likes to play is Minion Rush, and the little guy runs and they pick the coins up, and there's lots of dinging and flashing. Well, anytime that you hit those dings and those flashes, it creates dopamine. And then you have a dopamine surge that feels good, and then your body and your brain becomes predisposed. I need more of that to feel good, so I'm going to seek out more hits and more coins and more touches, and then I'm going to need more and more and more. And that speaks to that withdrawal or that tolerance component. I'm needing more to feel that same interaction. And we get that, if somebody laughs at a joke, hey, I'm going to get a surge of dopamine, and that feels really good. So I might tell that joke over and over again, and then it's going to feel great. So that happens everywhere. But there is this intense reaction when you're playing these screens or these video games, because you're getting that hit and that kind of positive reinforcement over and over and over again. I'm not sure if some of you have watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, and they speak about this. And one of them really resonated with me was on Facebook and their likes. And I'm going to post a picture. It's a beautiful picture of my family. I'm so happy, positive. And then you'll kind of go back, and it's like they might have given 100 likes, might have looked within 3 seconds. Well, they're going to hold your likes because you're going to keep going back. Oh, somebody gave me 2 likes. Somebody's giving me 4 likes. Oh, now I have 6, and I'm going to keep going and keep kind of coming back to it because you're getting that dopamine increase and rush, and that feels good. When you don't have it, right, that leads to more posting and more engagement and more looking. When you don't have that, it's like, oh man, am I likable? Are people still looking at my stuff? Does that, or am I as current? And that's something we hear with teens a lot of, if I get off of these social media sites or I disengage, I'm not going to have friends. I'm not going to be as current. Nobody's going to know me. As this false sense of security with people of, I need that positive reinforcement because you're getting a global reinforcement from so many people at one time. And another piece I want to touch on that's really important, we talked in, the US, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual is how we diagnose. Well, the World Health Organization, which is, they have really defined, video games and screen addiction to be an addiction. And one of them, one of the reasons why is there's increased research that these video games, they decrease the gray matter in your brain, particularly in the frontal lobe. So I'm sure you guys have heard brains aren't fully developed until you're 25. That speaks a lot to your frontal lobe. That's your decision-making, your impulse control, ability to be planning and organize, attend. Well, if we're watching an increased amount, a large amount of screens and playing these video games, we're decreasing that gray matter.
But you do stuff to keep going.
Which shows a reduction in, provides opportunity for reduction.
Well, part of that,
organizing.
part of that, you don't know the people in the class yet.
Hey guys, I think somebody is not on mute. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think everybody can just double check. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, just to clarify, so if you have this reduction in gray matter in your brain, it's going to show a marked increase in, you're not going to be able to have impulse control, effective decision-making, be able to plan and organize more effectively. And kids in particular, that is very difficult for those executive functioning skills. They're learning that. It's very difficult for them to plan, organize, engage. And if you think about it, we're then putting on the screens and they're not even having the opportunities to learn how to plan, organize, and engage because they're spending so much time on a video game. So it's really counter kind of this negative circular pattern.
I wanted to mention that one of the articles that we have posted on ckgconnections.com speaks to the speed of the game as you get a faster dopamine hit. And so it is a little more addictive to play something like Candy Crush versus like a video game that is a lot of strategy and is a slow game, like puzzle games or things you have to figure out. So going back to that dopamine hit in your example of Candy Crush, that different kinds of games do tend to bring with them a different level of like addiction or that dopamine hit. And that is also in this article, it talks about how that's why social media is addictive, is because it's like the speed that you're scrolling through and seeing things and the speed that those likes come up makes a difference.
And that's a really good point too, I think, in terms of the speed and like just being mindful of what people are playing, what they're engaging in. And there's some that are better than others. You know, a lot of kids will come in and they like Minecraft and they like the Roblox. Well, those are really creative kind of builder games if you put them on that, you know, that portion. Those are ones that might actually be really healthy if, you know, utilized in small doses. And so take that into consideration when kind of figuring out how you want to incorporate screen time into your family dynamic. Just pick the ones that are a little less addictive, that don't hit on the dopamine receptors as much, aren't as violent, so they're not really causing that hyper arousal. And you know, if you have a child who struggles with ADHD, hyperarousal, they're hyper aroused by everything already. And then if they're playing video games and they're drawn to that, well, they're already having a hard time attending, focusing, impulse control. They're already hyper aroused, and then we're kind of putting that in. That's why they struggle. So just kind of little food for thought.
So nobody starts out using any sort of substance with the, intention to become addicted. So there is a positive effect. So they're getting something positive out of it. So can we talk about that a little bit, Ashley? Like what is the positive effect that people are feeling from screen use and video games?
So we hear this a great deal in my office of particularly with high conflict with parents coming in and saying, I don't want the screens, I don't want the video games. We need to pull them away, and the kids have a complete meltdown. And whether it's even substances in my office, I always start with the question, well, what do you like about it? Like if you're gonna like utilize drugs or you're gonna drink alcohol, there has to be a component that made you like curious to start there. And it might be, hey, I just wanted to relax. I hear that one a lot with screens and video games. Or I wanted to engage with my peers and have that social interaction in that time. Or, it's really educational. I'm learning things. I don't get to learn Korean at school, so I'm really interested in that. So I'm learning Korean and get to Google it. I get these opportunities for Snapchat facts. I have accessibility to people of diverse backgrounds and interests that aren't necessarily in my kind of pool or my neighborhood and community. So there's a social justice component and form to this as well that can be really interesting. And then one piece that is very, you hear a lot is if you are struggling with chronic illness or you have anxiety and depression and you might feel stigmatized and not want to talk about that, there's an opportunity for people to kind of be able to connect in a way that's can be, if done in a very, in a very boundaried way, can be done in a way that can feel, positive. I have somebody that understands and gets my experiences, and I can help, communicate about things that I might not necessarily be able to do, with people that go to my school or, or in my community.
I would add to that list, and I see, so my kids are tweens. I have 11-year-old twin boys. And I see amazing research skills in their video game use, where they want to beat a level in a game they're playing. So someone asked, what is like a slower game? So one of my kids is really into Legend of Zelda. And it takes him, some time and effort and work and to, beat the boss. And when he gets stuck, he will go and research it online. Like, how am I going to beat this boss? And he, has done this totally on his own without asking for my help. And then he'll go back and figure it out. So I think that there are some positives that we don't want to like throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Absolutely. And I think that might also be one of the things when we're working with kids is the parents, they assume that we're going to say that all video games and screen time is bad. So when you come to a conversation with a child of, hey, I think we need to reduce the screen time, they're immediately on the defense. Or I think if you all had the opportunity to sit with your child and say, you know, what, like, why do you spend so much time on these? Like, what is this really about? Like, teach me what you're doing. Help me understand what you're getting from this. And there's an engagement component with you in it. You might understand a little bit more about what they're doing and why they're doing it. So they feel nurtured and supported. You're engaging activity of interest. And then you can kind of be able to like more easily say, okay, well, how can we put limits on it so you can still engage in other activities, but also feel like you're not missing out on these other pieces of peer support and engagement and, doing some of the activities you really like on the internet and with your screens.
And I see some questions coming in about like other activities and what are time limits. And we are going to get to that very shortly. But I do want to touch on, so we talked about like, hey, there are some positives of video game and screen use, but what are some of the negatives that we haven't touched on? And when do we know that it's become unhealthy? Like, when is it, really excessive versus maybe it's weird, it's a bad habit?
So overarching in all the research that I was doing in preparation, and I didn't think about it because I spend so much time focusing on the mental health and not the physical piece, was overarching research and evidence that there is a high correlation with obesity with the amount of time you're engaging with physical or with video games and screen time. The more you play, the more likely you're going to struggle with obesity, and then that long-term affects your physical health as well as your mental health. So there's that piece. And then this one, as I see a lot, is there's decreased opportunity for social engagement with peers, which long-term leads to increased social anxiety in situations. I'm not comfortable going into a store and having a conversation with the store clerk and buying the thing because I don't really ever practice doing that. Or I don't want to go in the restaurant and order, can you please order for me, mom and dad? Because I don't want to have that conversation. Lack of motivation. And I have a hard time getting up. I just want to play and do my video game all the time. So I'm not motivated to do other things, which can lead lack of motivation and engagement outside or with vitamin D can lead to increased anxiety, increased depression. And then this one is the huge one. And because it speaks to a big systemic issue is conflict between parents and kids. And this is overarching one of the number one topics when families come in to see me, that is a big source of like conflict, because the parents, think they need to have opportunities to do more things. They're not doing their chores. When they say, hey, can you come to dinner? They're spending the time on the screen of a video game and they say 1 more minute and it turns into 10. Because again, that frontal lobe is totally engaged and not able to kind of plan and organize their time. And then they end up in this fight. They're also overstimulated when they get off the game. So they come to try to get to, step out of it and have an actual conversation at dinner. And they're so overstimulated, they might be short or irritable or aggressive and volatile, and it leads to conflict. And then, if you're having a high conflict with your family, it's going to lead to decreased self-confidence, increased anxiety, increased depression. And then another piece that I'm really finding specifically as we've been through COVID is I'll say, hey guys, you need to decrease your video game and your screen time because they're getting sick of it too. It's no longer fun anymore. And they're like, well, what do I do? Like, they don't have any known hobbies and areas of interest that are indoor activities. And now we're in January because it's either I played sports and now sports stopped. I come home and I had a little bit of time, a window when I was in school, and then kind of doing my sport and doing my homework to be able to watch this stuff. So that was my extracurricular in the house. And now our time went from this much to this much, and I don't know what to do with my time. So being able to kind of say, and I often will go, well, give me a list. I want you to use your research skills, go on the internet, come up with 20, 25 things, like just hobbies. You don't even have to think they're that cool. Just write them down and brainstorm. So it's easier to access. Hey, you got to get off your video game or your screen. Well, I don't know what to do. Like, that's an overwhelming and anxiety provoking in itself. Like, what do I do? Like, I would have a hard time with that. So then they consult the list. This is, maybe I'll try this one, or, and that's where parents really come in of like, I'd like to do an art kit, or I'd like to paint, or I'd like to try sewing, or I'd like to do a yoga video or whatever. You have to help endorse that and give them opportunities in the house to be able to pick and choose from when we're taking it away.
I think this is kind of a good segue to talk about what is our reasonable time limits. We're in this unprecedented time and the pandemic that is continuing, just goes on and on. And we all know our kids are on screens way more than they would have been. A lot of them are in virtual school, so they're on screens for all of that. And then my kids will I have seen one of my kids took a virtual school break and then played a video game. And I was like, no, we're not doing that. Like, we're not going from screen to different screen. Like, but so we know that it's happening. It's way more than it ever would. So given that situation, what are reasonable limits?
Well, you all are going to roll your eyes because we're in the middle of COVID, and we have far surpassed the recommendation. So the American Association of Pediatrics recommends 2 hours of screens a day, and that includes TV, video games, and your social media screen devices. So 2 hours a day. Well, we're putting kids on for 6 hours, right? At minimum, being able to engage, and then they have to do their homework. So we are far surpassing that, which is a huge source of concern. And in regards to research of what that's doing right now, we don't know because we're in the middle of it. And we can only suspect. We have some of the research of negative implications already, but we don't know what the sustained long-term impact is. I think the one piece that's encouraging is being flexible. I'm hoping that, we're not getting all this positive kind of overstimulation when we're sitting on a screen, when we're in the classroom, because we are doing more lecture and it's more educational. So I'm hoping that's a little bit more positive. But I think just being mindful of balancing it, like they have to be on the school. It's not, hey, then you're never going to have screen time because you've been on all day. I know you need that social interaction and engagement, and they're not getting it on, that's the most, I think, disconcerting part for me. I thought, we're going into virtual school, at least they'll be able to see their friends and their peers and engage with them. Well, the majority of the kids that I'm talking to, they have their video camera off. So they're not even seeing each other. They're not even being able to have a conversation or engage. They don't even know who's in their class. And that's sad. So being able to give them an opportunity outside of the classroom to engage social media wise or with their video games, but then being really mindful of what they're doing with that time is super important.
Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on incremental changes versus cold turkey? I know for a lot of parents, myself included, you feel like you kind of like reach that limit where you just want to be like, just take it away. Like, I don't want to deal with it. So what are the difference in those approaches and pros and cons?
Yeah, so harm reduction is actually an evidence-based approach for addiction. So somebody might come in and I use alcohol as an example, right? I'm going to come in and I drink 5 beers a day. That's an issue. And that's when I know I'm impaired. Okay. How many do you think that you can drink in a day? I think I could, and more often than not, somebody's going to go way to the other end of the spectrum. I think I could drink 1 beer a day, or I'm not going to drink any. And it's like 5 to 0. Well, guess what? Like, we're setting yourself up for failure. So I think maybe why don't we, instead of 5, let's try for 3 for 2 weeks and see how you do, or even try 3 for a week. So that's the approach that I really would recommend taking when it comes to social media or this video game time. All right, I'm looking at your device, and if you have an iPhone, you can track it in terms of your settings, like how much you're on. I can see that you're on for 6 hours a day. And some of that is texting, some of that is FaceTiming. So those are all, I think, really healthy options for engagement. Some of might be checking email. Okay. But you're on for 6 hour day. How many hours do you think you can go? Recommended is 2. That includes TV time. I think maybe let's try, instead of 6, maybe we could try for 4.5 and see how you do, and try that for a week or maybe 2. And just really kind of give them an opportunity and some grace to figure it out and see where they can cut back. And then give an opportunity. Okay, you really achieved your goal. Positive reinforcement is really important. So you did 4.5 hours this week. That's awesome. I'm going to praise you for that. And I'm going to, give you that kind of encouragement. And then maybe the next week, all right, we did 4.5. Let's try for 3. Let's try for 2.5. And one of the pieces I want to touch on with this is, I have the families and the kids that come in, and they are really struggling emotionally, they're struggling behaviorally, they're struggling academically in school because they are spending so much time on video games and screens, and it's really preoccupying them. But I also have the families that come in and the kids are making straight A's, they're in honors classes, they're playing multiple sports, they do show up for dinner when asked and called, they're helping with their chores. And then there's this concern of, oh my gosh, I'm reading all this research and it's really impacting your brain and it's negative and I want to cut it out. And then the kids get really defensive and kind of frustrated, like, wait a minute, I'm doing all the right things and now you're stripping something from me. And is it really a problem? And so these are really good questions. Those created by the Child Mind Institute, to ask yourself as a parent. One, is my child sleeping enough and eating a somewhat balanced diet? Are they getting some form of exercise every day? Are they getting some quality time with family? Do they use some screen time to keep in touch with friends? And that's important and specific. Is the screen time to keep in touch with friends? Boys in particular will utilize their video games and their Xbox to engage with friends. You'll hear them bantering and talking not just about the game, but other stuff too. So keep that in mind, and then be mindful, like we were talking about before, are they first-person shooter games? Are they violent? Or are they the ones that are really hitting on the dopamine? And maybe we need to switch the game, not switch the engagement. Are they invested in schoolwork and keeping up with homework? And if you can answer yes to most of these questions, then it's probably not a huge deal. Like their social media or their video game usage might not be as much of a problem as it is for those kids who, really are struggling and impaired in these areas.
So Ashley, we had a question. What was the harm risk behavior when we talk about going cold turkey and that's riskier? What risky behavior are you talking about?
So harm reduction approach would be just what is the harm, the detriment. So where is it impeding your activity of daily living, or you socially or emotionally or psychologically? And if you are feeling those, we're going to take a reduction in the behavior or the activity or the addictive component to reduce the potential for harm. So if I'm struggling with motivation, I'm not doing my homework. Anytime a parent asks me to do something, I say no, which is an impulse control issue, right? I'm going to impulsively say no because that's my snap reaction when I'm doing something else. I am not going to eat or practice good hygiene because I'm staying up super late to play my game. I won't go to bed till 2 or 3 in the morning. Those are all really harmful behaviors. So then you might say, okay, if you're playing 3 or 4 or 5 hours of your video game and you have, 6 areas where it's potentially harmful to you, maybe what can you do? Where do you feel like you can cut back to kind of decrease the risk of harm for yourself? So if you're doing 6, maybe you can do 4.5. And it's important. The important piece of this that I didn't speak to is there are positive components to it. Anytime you work with somebody with an addiction and come in, my first question to them is, what are you getting from this? What is good about it? Help me understand. I need to understand, because it's a positive coping strategy, or rather a negative coping strategy for them that they're getting a positive reinforcement from. So if these kids are spending so much time on video games and screens, there's something good they're getting from it. And it might be negative coping strategy. If I rip that away in full and don't replace it with anything, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to make them anxious. I'm going to make them sad. I'm going to make them depressed. I'm going to make them concerned and worried, and I'm not giving them the tools and the resources to be able to replace it.
I want to mention that the article that Ashley just referenced from the Child Mind Institute will be on ckgconnections.com, and Jody will put that link in the chat. It's actually already up and available. So small incremental changes is what I'm hearing are better. And I can share an example. So my kids, for whatever reason that baffles me, want to get up early for school, and so that they have time to, I think, really to play video games or watch TV. And we got this puppy like so many other people in the pandemic. And I, this past week said, you know what, there's no more screens before school. Like I didn't get this puppy for me. Like you guys, you can play with the puppy before school. And so it's it's just one small time that I've cut out. And I do think it makes a difference. So it can be incremental. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
And in speaking to, is cold turkey, like, should you ask the question, is cold turkey something that you should consider unreasonable? And my answer to that is really depends. Like there are some kids who are super, really struggling and super ADHD. And the only thing that recourse we have, we've tried all the harm reduction approaches. We try to give a firm but flexible approach to be very supportive. And really, like, they can't get off of the video game. Like they are that, ingrained. And there is a piece in the DSM that's internet gaming disorder is an opportunity for further research. And while the percentage at 2013, when this came out, is very small, I think it's like 8.3% of boys and like a little over 4% of girls might struggle with this. Those are people who you might have to try cutting out cold turkey and then maybe giving incremental opportunities for it to earn it back. That is something. But I really want to caution for the majority of the population, if I am super firm and cut it out cold turkey and they don't have those coping strategies and positive supports and ideas of what they can do to replace that, that's concerning. So I think if you want to cut it out cold turkey, then we'll have to be way more diligent in terms of ensuring that they have access to like other options and activities, engagement of things to do. And it can't be, and I hear this often, and I'm a mom too, so I do this, like, just go outside and play. Well, like, they're like, go outside and play what? Like kick a ball around? Okay, like that's not that fun. Or like, we have to be mindful of kind of putting things in place that are really stimulating and engaging.
Can we talk about how long it takes for a new habit to take hold? Because I think as parents also, like, we want this process to be fast. Like I said, you're playing with the puppy before school. So why are you on the screen again, on day 4? Like, what is reasonable for us to expect how long it will take to make a change?
Yeah. So there's really cool study, and I believe it's done through the University of Wisconsin. It was really geared towards like businesses. And they did this big study, and it was recommended. It's called the NIATEX change process. And they found that if you create and change one thing at a time, and you give that change for 2 full weeks, it will be ingrained, and you can decide, is it something that's like working and you keep it, or is it something that's not working and then you need to try something else? So 2 full weeks is really a good opportunity to kind of get that pattern of behavior ingrained in you. And then if it's not working, that's when you might have to kind of go back as a parent and go, okay, I need to reevaluate this. Maybe it's not working. Got to figure out why and what's happening. And then change something else. If it is working and it's not exactly where you want to be, then maybe we have to like add something on to it and give that another opportunity for 2 weeks of change. So 2 weeks is a really great opportunity to really get something ingrained. One thing I see a lot is we forget to tell parents, when you take something away, you're changing a system, and we're kind of like cells. Like if you go back to everybody wants to be balanced to go back to homeostasis, even when it's dysfunctional, right? Well, if I change something, I'm changing the dynamic. Well, guess what happens? It gets worse before it gets better. So if you're taking the 2 weeks, and it's like the first 2 or 3 days, there's explosions, everybody's freaking out and having a hard time. Don't quit what you're doing. It means it's working. Like you're doing a good thing. And ride it out, see it through, practice some patience, consult your partner, call a friend, and see it through, because you're probably making change, and it's the right thing.
I saw a question, I'm backing up a little. I don't know if you've touched on this a little, but I don't know if you have any particular suggestions on how to manage particularly social media apps like TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, because there is that social aspect, which I think can make it a little harder.
I think follow the recommendations of these apps for the age. So I think one of the things that's happening is like we're giving them really early to individuals, so they're not in a developmentally appropriate age to be able to kind of understand the nuance and the context of the situation. So it's just where we see kind of the bullying or peer pressure, or they just have access to things that might not be necessarily age appropriate. So be mindful of that. And even if it's, say it's 13 or 14, you have to assess your child on where they are developmentally. Are they developmentally a mature 13, 14-year-old, or are they, really, 11 or 12? So that's one piece. I can only speak for my own opinion. You are a parent, you own the device. And I think we have to trust but verify, right? So if you're putting something like Snapchat on their phone and we're trusting that they're making the healthy choices, awesome. But we're not having an opportunity to verify because it goes away and it disappears. You might trust your child, say TikTok. We're not necessarily trusting what TikTok is putting out there to see. And you have to make sure then that you have an opportunity to verify that. So if you're giving these apps, be mindful that you're trusting but verifying. You have access to their passwords on their phones, and the understanding that this is a gift and it's a privilege. It's not like they don't own it. It's not their property. So you can check it and look at it and explore it at any time. So be mindful. I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to give you some space to be independent and practice your autonomy, but I'm also going to verify. And one thing, I felt so bad for a little guy that was in my office, and he's a middle schooler, and he had Instagram. And he was so uncomfortable because mom walked in and he was like deleting all the stuff off of Instagram, and he was like panicked. And she's like, "What are you doing?" And she thought he was doing something really inappropriate. Well, what happened was Instagram popped the ad up, and it was a girl in her lingerie, and he was a middle schooler, and he was absolutely mortified because his mom walked in on the video, and he was so scared he's going to get in trouble. And it looked like, he was doing so. So also be mindful as parents, like sometimes they're doing things and they're doing the app and they're trying to be appropriate, and the app is faulting them. The app is creating these things that are giving them opportunity where they're not developmentally ready to look at. And it's not necessarily their fault. So I just want to kind of, little bit of kind of give a little kind of on the kid's side that maybe sometimes they're not really doing things that are inappropriate. It's the app.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about stigma. And I know, I think it's common to see comments, especially online, of excessive screen time use or video game playing is a parenting issue. Like, you're just not setting limits, and it's kind of this judgmenty stigma towards parents. And so I want to talk about that and the reasons behind the screen time use and why stigmatizing is not helpful in this struggle.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think maybe in COVID more than ever, there's we are finding, whatever's going on in the world today, people are very, very vocal in their disdain, as well as, people put positive, but there's a lot of dislikes and negative that's kind of put out there. And I think there's a false sense of security when you're on a social media app to say what you want or say what you think, and it's behind a device and it doesn't have that same hit. But we all know it hits hard when you see it, right? So it's interesting feeling like there's a judgment because we do have to have these limits and boundaries, but also other people don't know your child and you do, so they don't know that your kid might really be struggling with anxiety or struggling with depression. They're having a hard time getting out of bed and they're on it, and that's their only engagement with their people every day. Or they don't know that they're struggling, like I said before, with a chronic illness, and that's how they get engaged socially with somebody who also is struggling with a social, with a chronic illness. Or they're playing their video games because they feel really, really uncomfortable social wise to be able to have a conversation in a setting with school. So you just have to trust as parents that your kids better than anybody else, and you are doing the best thing that you can for them and by them, and give yourself a lot of grace and flexibility, and just get off social media. If people are being that negative and, and that judgmental about things and saying it's these parenting concerns and limits, stand up for one another. I think that's all really important, validate one another that you're doing the best you can. But also trust your parenting judgment, because there's kids that, and some kids I'll say Snapchat's the devil. Like, don't give this poor child Snapchat. Like, they're not in a place that they can do it, utilize it. And then they're pining when somebody doesn't respond to their snap and they're so anxious about it and they feel bad. Like, let's remove that for them. But there's other kids who are really socially anxious and everybody else has Snapchat and they are developmentally and age appropriate where they could be on it. And I'm like, give them Snapchat. Let them have that independence and autonomy. Let them engage with their community at their school. They're in a place that they can really be able to handle it and do it in a good way. So every child's different. You know them better than, and I always tell parents, you're going to know them better than I ever will. And that's true for the rest of the world, right? You will know your children better than anybody else ever will. And you get to trust what's best for them and, make the right decisions for them. And parents do the best they can.
And then I'm going to flip the coin and ask, what impact does parent screen time have on our children?
So from an addiction perspective, everything, right? You are their models. They look at you for direct vocal cues as well as indirect cues on how to engage with the world, how to engage with your, with a partner, in relationships, how to engage at work, how to engage at home, right? They look to you for everything. We often say this when it's looking at drinking, they're looking, you're not giving them any spoken cues of like, well, say don't drink and drive, but if you have 2 beers at the dinner party and then you get in the car, guess what we taught them? Like, hey, I can drink and drive, but you can't. Like, that's a hard conversation. Like, and kids are very black and white. So if you're saying, hey, screen time is really difficult, but I come home and I will be honest, like I'm the first one. I come home and I'm finishing up my emails for work and kind of giving the rapid fire or, reading my book on my Kindle, like, which is kind of ridiculous, right? But I'm on it and they're getting the cue of, hey, like, it's okay for you to be on your phone all the time or pick it up at dinner or answer the phone call because it's an emergency, but I can't. So just be mindful, like your engagement and with your phone is being seen and what you're saying has to match like what your behaviors are. And that's super important. And the other piece is kids want to engage with their parents, whether you believe it or not. And, I've heard before my husband, his uncle said, yeah, they get to be about 6th grade and then they don't stop liking you. I'm like, that's just not the case. Like you have to engage with your children and they want to engage with you. So if you're kind of checking out and not on your phone and on your phone, well, they're going to check out and be on their phone too. Or if you're checking out, watching a movie, guess what they're going to do? They're going to watch a movie or they're going to go play their video game because there's no social engagement. So they're looking for the cues. And really right now, you guys are it. Like they don't have a lot of opportunities socially to engage with the world. And I'm saying that with as much grace and as much understanding that people do have to work. People are working from home and parents need a break. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. For those of you who are here, 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, they are a handful and they are around all the time. And sometimes, and they're screaming and yelling and they're running and relapse and they're getting the dog riled up. And sometimes I need to make dinner and them sit and watch a screen. And that's okay. Like we need to have that kind of grace of, set the boundaries and be firm but flexible.
So I'm going to back up to some questions that came in. Is Fortnite bad? Sorry, my screen just moved. What are some good game replacements that put our kids less at risk?
Okay, I am not a video game expert. So I can just say from what I know of Fortnite, is it bad? I wouldn't say it's bad. Is it a first-person shooter game? From research, first-person shooter games might cause increase in hyperarousal and increased fear response. So I'm going to have more of an inclination when I get nervous or anxious or scared to be aroused and either run away and avoid things or react. But you also know your child and you know how they might engage in those situations and how they are experiencing Fortnite, and you have to make the best decision for your kid. So in regards to that one, good replacements are things that are educational always. So there's good educational apps for all kinds of ages. And then games like, and this I'm really getting I'm aging myself, but Mario Kart, like racing games, those are really good. Anything that mimics like Super Mario Brothers or Mario Brothers where there's stages, right? And you're progressing through the stages and you're accomplishing a task and then you're being able to kind of progress. That's always a really good game because they're working towards something and they're growing and they're like kind of have an enhanced sense of productivity. And I'll say that also as an aside, when you're engaging and finding things for them to do outside of sports and video games and screens, really focus on things that there is an end result. Like if I create a puzzle and do a puzzle, well, there's an end to the puzzle. Or I make a bracelet, I see the bracelet, there's a finished product. So any games that there's like you're working through and you're achieving a goal and there's a finished product, those are great. Games with playing NBA or baseball games, those kind of like sport games, that's really cool engagement with peers and opportunity, and you're talking about it and you're also learning the game, which is kind of neat. So those are really good ones. Minecraft is a really cool one, as well as Roblox. Those are both really great ones because you're building things. Old school is going old school, but I know some of my kids still play Sims because they're building the worlds and they're kind of have their people and they're designing to get them to do things. So there's social interaction with that too. So really anything you're interacting with other people in a positive way, it's not going to hyper arouse because it's super violent and aggressive, and there's like an end product, and you're utilizing creativity, or you're like working through stages and goals are really good ones.
There's some really cool puzzle games that I've seen too. There's one, The Room, I think, not that I'm promoting any particular video game, but I mean, my 11-year-old could solve it, and I was like, I can't help you here. Like, it's like beyond my ability level, but it's a cool puzzle game. Question, what is your recommendation if the screen time is exceeding 2 hours, but is used for productive activities such as work, study, and research?
So I would say then you get to be flexible in that. So if they're using it for the work, study, and research, and they need a little bit more time to be able to have that social engagement, do stuff that's fun, let them do it. One of the things I really like is say 1-to-1. So if you're playing one hour of screen time video game activity, let's also combine it with 1 hour of non-screen time video game activity, whether it's getting outside, getting vitamin D, creating bracelets, doing a paint by number, reading a comic, drawing a comic, running labs, playing basketball with a friend, any of those things that's counterproductive, do a 1-to-1 ratio.
We have a question. Do you know if there is any pressure put on the gaming industry, Netflix, TikTok, et cetera, to help kids with limits, knowing the concern of brain development and the increase with concern for mental health?
I don't know. I'm being a little bit of a pessimist. I had a conversation with a colleague of like why it's not even in the DSM that this is an issue, and if it will be in our next, as every year, not every year, but every several years, there's like an update to the manual. I'm like, I don't know if it'll be in one, because that is such a huge financial market for our economy to kind of continue to create these games and these apps, and it's putting a lot of money into the economy at the detriment of our kids. So, there's a political piece to it. If I cause it addiction, well, guess what? They're going to have to do something with it. If I say there's a problem, well, we're going to have to fix it. And, that's an issue.
What do you recommend for older teen boys when their friends mostly want to play and socialize on first-person shooter games like Battlefront 2?
That's a really good question. I think that if that's what they're doing, you can either, as a parent, you get to decide, are you going to monitor it and give it to them in small doses and bursts, or maybe like limit it to 30 minutes a day, or give them that opportunity, but then really say you have to disengage from that activity and physically go do something else that's less stimulating, and like kind of utilizing your resources in another way. So I'm going to go play that game, and then I'm going to get outside and I'm going to go for a run, or take the dog for a walk, or play basketball, or come downstairs and help mom or dad make dinner. You can give it, but you also have to be really flexible and have the other opportunities for them to utilize their brain. The good news about our brain as like, an organ is it is very, very, very resilient. So if we're experiencing these hyperarousal, or we have indicated that there's gray matter atrophy and we're worried about it, if we pull this from them and kind of give them other resources, guess what? Our brain is going to create other like neural pathways all over the place, and be able to regenerate the things that we've lost. So that's really good news. So don't worry If they play this too much, right, we have to be flexible. Like you give your kid a Coke every now and then. All right. We'll give them the shooter game every now and then, but we're going to make sure that then, the rest of their diet is healthier options.
I think that we have covered all the questions that came in the chat. Does anybody have any other questions that we have not touched on tonight?
One piece that the last thing I want to end with is when we're talking about addiction, and people don't talk about this as enough, is that relapse is part of the process. When you look at, go through stages of change, and that's how we diagnose you're not even sure you have a problem. You recognize you have a problem. You don't want to do anything with it. You start preparing to do something about it. You start doing something about it, and then you're kind of managing it and you're doing well. Well, the last part of that circle is relapse. And people make mistakes and they struggle. And then you have to focus on it from the day to the day, one day to the next. I'm focusing on today, and then I'll deal with tomorrow. If you all have a relapse and your kid has a really bad day and there's been too much time on screens and they played the first shooter game for 4 hours and oh my gosh, it's not doom and gloom, and we're not going to go like complete opposite in the spectrum. It's like, okay, well, this is what we did today. So let's create opportunities the next day to really focus on enhancing their experiences and get them outside and kind of focus on the educational pieces. And maybe you played a lot 4 hours today. Well, I'm not going to play as much tomorrow.
We talked about this question right before we started about how we would be sure to touch on it, and then we were remiss in talking about it. How do we build that internal kind of control? So we have these parental controls on iPad, Nintendo Switch, I'm sure some others have it, that we can just set the time limit. And then after 2 hours, it cuts off, or after 5 o'clock at night, it turns off. But the kids aren't learning that internal control. So how do we teach that control?
So one of them simply to do is, you start and from a very early age, or even, and you can do it in high school, is really help them create a routine and can establish some consistency. So, I wanted you to get up at the same time every day. I don't care if it's 10 or 11 o'clock. I want you to get up at the same time every day. I want you to start your morning with a ritual, whether it's you eat breakfast first, or you take a shower first, or you get out and you do jump jacks first. I don't care what it is, but you do the same thing every day. You eat lunch around the same time every day. To create consistency in your routine, and that's going to do two things. It's creating healthy executive functioning skills and planning. And it's also kind of giving this opportunity where if you fill your time and your day with so much stuff, guess what? We'll have less opportunity for video games and screen time. So that's really important. And the other piece is help them to create some independence and autonomy and holding on to the control. So instead of you just turning it off and there's no option, hey, I need you to set a timer for 15, 30 minutes. They can use it on their phone. They can do it on a kitchen timer. My kiddo has a really cool watch that he can set timers on for himself. And then when the timer goes off, you get to set the timer. When the timer goes off, you have to get up and physically go do something else. So, sometimes you give them for a task and it goes off and you give the request for a task, but also, hey, I'm going to, set the timer, you set the timer and you get off. And if you're older, like go physically do something and move your body and set that expectation. Ultimately, if kids want to, or people want to make change, they have to be responsible and in control of it. We can't make them do it. And that's what happens when they're older,
If the addiction becomes severe enough that a parent is seeking counseling services, we know that it's tough to get in places, especially now during the pandemic. Do you have any suggestions for accessing resources?
Yeah, so the first line of defense really is go to your primary care provider. So pediatricians always have like a plethora of options and resources and supports, and can really splice out kind of, is this really a concern where we need to escalate it to outpatient therapy and treatment, or is it something that we can manage in-house and be able to support you in that? The other piece is if you feel like there's outpatient stuff, you can always call our office. I can't guarantee that we'll have availability, but our intake providers are really, really excellent and exceptional in being able to kind of help kind of steer you in the right direction and ensure that you're getting some services with people that are open in the community and are diligent about making sure that they're available. And then also at the Virginia Treatment Center for Children. CKG has a wonderful resource center. And Susan, if you guys can provide that information to them, they are wonderful in being able to, you call in and you explain the problem and connecting you to resources. And again, they update constantly of this person doesn't have any availability and they're no longer taking people, but these people do. And they, there's outpatient programming. Unfortunately, there's not a ton of inpatient treatment, residential programming, if it's a true form of addiction for this type of thing right now. Start with the outpatient, start with making the call with your primary care provider.
Thank you to Michael for putting these suggestions for like adventure and multiplayer games in the chat. If you're looking for those, there's a good list there. And then one last question, is it possible our kids are not really addicted, but just depend on this time to socialize with their friends during the pandemic since there's not many other opportunities?
100,000,000%. Like, I think we are in a world where everybody's struggling. And I use this analogy a lot. You go and you try to utilize your resource right now. And I, go to touch them. I equate it to you're driving down, like, if you drive like towards Virginia Tech, right? Southwest Virginia, you see the beautiful rock on the side of the mountain. You're like, oh, I just want to touch it. It's so strong. Well, those are our resources right now. We touch it and it says like, watch for falling rock. Well, we're watching for falling people. Like, I touch my supports and they're having a hard time. I contact this person and they're also having a hard time. And that's where we are. And I think this is such an escape and an outlet for kids right now, because it's fun, because I can avoid the sadness that I might be feeling because I can't see my friends, or school kind of frankly stinks because I'm on virtual all the time. And this is a good opportunity for me to escape in a way that feels healthy. I still get that socialization and engagement. But, I'm doing it in a, still get the socialization and engagement in a way that feels a little bit more secure given COVID.
Thank you, Ashley. And thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. We hope that you leave this evening feeling like you have a few more tools in your toolbox to find a healthy balance for video game and screen use in your lives and in the life of your family. Check out ckgconnections.com. It's in the chat for the additional resources, a list of articles. The recording of this event will be up in a couple days. It's just the audio recording, which is what we'll be posting this year. We know some of the topics that we cover are really tough. And so for the benefit of anonymity, we're just going to post audio recordings, so you don't have to worry about being out there on the internet in this forum. And our next conversations with CKG is February 17th, ADHD, understanding and supporting your teen. So we hope to see you or pass that information along to someone that you feel like it may benefit. So thank you and have a great evening.